Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a bicephalic serpent. That is a snake with no tail, just two heads at either end, each one straining in a different direction in order to try and satiate its voracious appetite. Here to talk to you today about the lunar nodes, specifically the North Node in Aries and the South Node in Libra. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of what that might actually mean for you, my beloved planetary parishioners, let us explore what the nodes actually are, because unlike most of the bodies that we deal with in astrology, they are not planets, they are not actual physical objects out there in outer space. Rather, they are an intersection between two different planes. So the sun follows an imaginary pathway in the sky that we refer to as the ecliptic, and most of the other planets in the solar system also follow along this ecliptic too, in a merry zodiacal dance. However, the moon being recalcitrant and being closer to the Earth as well has a different orbit. However, when she rises, she intersects this ecliptic, and when she sets, she also intersects this ecliptic. And those points of intersection are the lunar nodes, with the North Node representing where she rises over the sun's ecliptic, and the South Node where she descends below it. Now, that all might sound very abstruse and complex and abstract, and it is, but why would we care ordinarily about these invisible mathematical interzones? Well, because when the sun and moon are either conjunct or opposite one another, if they also happen to be aligned with one of these nodes, that is when we have either a solar or a lunar eclipse. And as eclipses were considered to be great portentous moments in the ancient past, moments when whole empires could fall, when kings could be deposed and overthrown and taken over by a new rambunctious upstart, the need for ancient astrologers to be able to track the course of these nodes was a matter of intense importance. Now, because eclipses are bizarre events when we can be stricken with darkness in the middle of daylight and the luminaries appear to have been temporarily devoured, in the ancient world the nodes were envisaged as being dragons or serpentine monsters. And it is for this reason that the North Node is referred to as the Caput Draconis, or the dragon's head, and the South Node is referred to as the Cauda Draconis, or the dragon's tail. And in these little anatomical imageries, we have some little implications of what these points mean for us symbolically. Because the nodes represent the synthesis and decussation of the different directions in which the sun and moon are going, or the different way in which they approach the directionality of life as a polarity, the lunar nodes also represent this tug of war between the development of solar individuality and consciousness, and then the lunar pull back towards what is familiar, safe, secure, comfortable, and known. So in order to understand the nodes better, we also have to understand the sun and moon better, how they are both integral parts of us, and yet which at times can also seem to be pulling us apart because they are taking us in different directions. The moon, as a representation of maternity, but also childhood, represents the person who we are born as, the raw, undifferentiated, undistinguished natural essence of who we are. Before we come into the world, before we've turned ourselves into anything unique, special, or individual, the moon represents the unique specialness of simply what we are as a raw, unformed potency. And for many of us, we stay in connection with the moon through contact with our inner child. The moon is unconscious, it's dreamy, it governs the realm of sleep, imagination, and our ability to emotionally and energetically fuse and connect with another being. The moon helps us connect with other people emotionally, to break down those barriers between self and other and enter into this dream state where things are a little more impressionistic, a little more fluid and boundaryless, just as like when we are born as children, we do not separate our egos from our mothers. We are one and the same as her because our survival is so dependent on her. She is in some ways our self at the same time. So the moon helps us to feel close, to feel intimate, to feel connected, to feel nurtured. And yet, if we remain in the lunar stage forever, then we never develop as human beings. We never develop an identity of our own, because developing an identity, a personality, an individual, this separate, strong sense of I am, means in some way embarking on that solar heroic journey and departing from the comfort and security of belonging to this womb-like embryonic matrix. Instead, like the hero who leaves the small village in which he was born to go out into those untraipsed territories, to become ourselves, we have to say goodbye to the known. And that process of entering into unfamiliar arenas in life to continue to push and develop ourselves and the evolutionary growth of the soul is represented by the North Node. But these nodes exist as points of balance. If we are forever with the North Node out on that heroic journey, always going out there into the world, we lack that sense of having a safe place we can withdraw. We lack the ability to rest, to sleep, to connect. If we stay too much in the South Node, then we are likely to remain too static and too unformed. We need the balance of both to reach that sacred sense of conjunction between the two that alchemy lauded so highly. So the moon represents what we inherently, innately, unconsciously, instinctively, automatically are, whereas the sun represents what we are striving to become, the way in which we are attempting to order, give shape, structure, rationality, and a civilized gloss to our own personal universe, at which we exist at the center as the sacred lens or mediator, bringing our own personal heroic narrative into being. You know, the moon rules the dreamy time of night, where we have mysterious, cloudy, swallowed darkness, where we have the shimmering, beautiful starlight, where because we are not definitely one thing or the other, we can feel more permeated and interconnected with everything. And yet, because we lack that definite shape or structure of self, if we are too lunar, we can also be easily manipulated and exploited by other people, because we are so keen to identify with everyone and everything around us, we can easily just blend into things. And when we are blending with things that are lovely and benevolent and have our best interests at heart, that can be a wonderful, nourishing experience that makes us feel full and whole. But if we get swallowed up and devoured by something that we feel dependent on in some way, but which is actually toxic and poisonous and ravenous and is willing to destroy us and anything individual about us to keep us in its power and clutches, then that lunar consciousness can be a dangerous place. That's when we need the definite light of the solar self that says, no, I am this, I am not that. I have these clear, focused boundaries, and through the light of my own personal authenticity and individuality, I will cast out and exorcise any demons who try and grab a hold of me. I am the sun. I am fiery and hot. If you attempt to grab me, your fingers will scald and burn. And these are things I will not tolerate, because I am operating from the consciousness of the great I am. So the sun really is the start of us that begins to emerge probably around the toddler stage, where we begin to get a sense that our own personal willpower and desires and visions of how life should be are not just perfect extensions of who our parents are, but can actually pull us in totally different directions. That solar light that begins to make itself known is the part that says, I'm not just a perfect repetition of my mum and my dad and the rest of my ancestry. Actually, there's things that separate me quite distinctly from them, and which may even bring me into conflict with them. And this is where we have the push and pull between those nodes, between the part of us that thinks, well, actually, I should minimize my individuality. I should minimize those things that separate me from the rest of that collective soup, because if I become too individuated, I also become lonely. I also risk cutting myself off from what once nourished me and which gave me life, but which could actually be stifling me now. It's wonderful to become the sun, to find your own place in the cosmos, to become your own very definite self that other people can see and recognize and say, that's a true individual, that's someone who truly stands out from the rest of the masses. But to be the sun shining in the sky can very often mean to shine alone. You know, when the sun is there in the sky, everything else disappears. You can't see the stars, you can't see the rest of the cosmos, you just see the bright light of Apollo there standing by himself. And there's times when it feels wonderful to be that beacon of light, but also when we're feeling that lunar tug, there's also the part of us that misses the idea that there is some kind of nest we could return to, that we could take off the egoic weight of always having to be ourselves and just, go back to being a baby, where we could fuse with other people, where we could have people look after us, where we could stop being the hero who's in charge all the time and just rest. We have a need to be both of these things, and in some people the solar pull is stronger, and in other people the lunar pull is stronger as well, but we all in some way have to come to terms with that inherent duality that exists within all of us. And the lunar nodes, by virtue of the fact that they don't stay still, but carry on moving slowly around the zodiac in an 18-year eclipse cycle, keeps pushing us in that process of evolution balanced with the surety and stability of being rooted in the known. So the North Node, the Dragon's Head, the Caput Draconis, to me, represents an area of life that we have still yet to conquer, or in which we wish to more greatly distinguish and individuate ourselves. It represents an area in which there are more dragons to be faced, to be slain, to be conquered, the thrill of entering totally new territory and not knowing whether you will succeed or thrive. And generally, the consensus among astrologers is that the North Node represents an area where we have to develop, where we have to push ourselves, where we have to put ourselves out there, be willing to leave those comfort zones, those places of security, and bring light into an area of life or an area of ourselves that may hitherto have been left in darkness. But the fact that it's represented by a dragon's head also tells us something else about the North Node as well. It's a place where we have to bring consciousness, where we have to bring awareness, where something about life or ourselves that maybe before we've been ignorant of or haven't fully understood, we now need to bring into solid focus as something that is clear, that is detailed, which we now comprehend as a lived experience and not just dead, empty theory. It's an area in which we need to bring illumination and enlightenment. And one thing that people don't tell you about experiences that are illuminating or enlightening, and I don't necessarily just mean this in a spiritual sense, is that it can be painful. It can be painful approaching something and seeing something clearly for what it is, and not just what in our lunar states we have dreamed or hoped or feared it might be. When we see something what it really is, so many illusions have to be challenged and shattered and provoked and transformed into a form that may be unrecognizable. And yet at the same time, there is also a power of feeling that, yes, there is more of the world that I have seen, there is more of the world that I have conquered, that I have brought into light, that I have brought into rational, clear awareness. I now understand more. I am more experienced, I have more skills under my belt that I can now incorporate into the grander wholeness of my being. The South Node on the other pole, the dragon's tail, the Cauda Draconis, represents an area in which we already have experience, where we already feel comfortable, where we already have the sense of security of knowing that it's an area we have mapped out well and integrated to the point where we can act in that way instinctually, automatically, and reflexively. We think about a tail as being something primarily animals have, even though we have a vestigial tail in our tailbone. The tail is still this instinctual automatic thing that works by itself. When a dog is happy, it wags its tail. If it's on guard or alarmed, then the tail becomes stiff and rigid. All of these things happen by autonomic impulses, and it's the same way with the South Node. It's something that's become so habitual to us as a way of responding or perceiving or reacting and interacting with life that we don't have to think about it. In that lunar way, it just flows automatically from us by itself. Once upon a time, it may have represented more of a North Node or a Solar Node theme that we had to develop, but now it is part of us. You know, the South Node really, and the moon in general, is that muscle memory. That's something that has been so incorporated in our organism that it no longer requires that annoying consciousness of really having to focus and concentrate on things. Instead, you can just be in the zone and you can let things flow out of you automatically. And I can give a good example from my own experience of how those nodal influences can play out in my own life. So I am a musician, as some of you might know, and if you perform with someone or by yourself very regularly, and you've maybe got a bunch of songs in your set list that you've performed and you've practiced and you've rehearsed together 100 million times, you no longer worry about those songs. They're so incorporated into you, into your personal matrix, into your memory, into your muscle memory, that when you go up on stage and one of those songs that you know very well starts playing, you don't think about it. You just go into that automatic dream state where everything's just flowing from your fingertips and you're doing everything you need to do. You don't worry about making mistakes. You don't worry that you're going to fuck up. You've done it a million times. You'll do it a million more times. It just happens by itself. You can switch off. You can even practically fall asleep. And that's the state that the moon likes to be in. It likes to be in that state where things are just happening automatically and comfortably. It doesn't have to think about them. It's flowing along with them, with those lunar waters. It's letting things happen. It's letting things wax and wane according to their own natural rhythms without needing to be that solar consciousness that grabs things and takes control of them. But when you learn a new song and you add it to your set list, suddenly you are in that realm of solar consciousness again, of going, okay, what's the chord change here? What's the harmony that I sing there? What were those lyrics again? You know, you're having to be focused and concentrated on what you're doing. You're having the excitement and the frisson of learning and performing something new, but there's also the terror that you could fuck up. And yet, if you don't enter into that solar realm, you spend the rest of your life playing the same fucking songs over and over again. But if you go into the new realm, yes, you might make mistakes, you might feel uncomfortable the first few times you play that song before you properly learnt it, but you also have the enchantment and promise of bringing new music, new melodies, new harmonies, new life into your life. Things can become so stagnant in the realm of the South Node because we never want to go beyond what's known, because then we have to bring that uncomfortable solar consciousness into it, you know. There can be the discouragement of things not flowing. And this is the thing, when we fight that dragon's head, when we enter into that heroic realm, it's that experience of having to swim upstream, of having to climb the mountain. Whereas when we're in the South Node, we are flowing with the stream. We are returning to the source. We are going home. We are walking steadily downhill. Gravity is on our side with that centrifugal pull. With the North Node, everything takes active effort. And that can be uncomfortable, and it can be painful, and that South Node can seem so tempting and cozy. You think, well, why would I want to go gallivanting out there over those distant monster-filled hills? Yes, there might be riches, but do I really want to fight a dragon to get a hold of them? Don't I have enough right here? The cleverness of the lunar nodes is that they often engineer fated experiences when they are in transit to force our hands so that we do develop rather than remaining in a stagnant, formless state. And they usually do this by a kind of carrot and stick agenda. Sometimes the North Node can promise us a carrot. It can kind of say, okay, you know, I can see you might be a bit tentative about leaving the coziness of the South Node. You might prefer just to stay where you are with the familiar and the known, but hey, you know, if you did lean into this area, if you did develop new skills, if you did explore new modes and ways of living, or new types of relationships, which is how the nodes often express themselves, just think how greater your world would be. Think how much more open it would be. Think of the freedom and the strength and the vitality that would be offered to you. Think of the riches, think of the fame, think of the glory. It sends us things that make that new realm look potentially glamorous, tempting, appetizing. Sometimes, if it's experiencing a positive transit to our own natal charts or to another transiting planet, we might just feel that strong inner impulse that says, oh yes, that is actually something I need to do. We may even have felt that build-up in ourselves saying, yeah, that is a part of life or a thing I've wanted to do for a long time, but I've never just found the time. But now I feel there's the time to do that thing. However, if no such temptations or inducements can be found, or if they are not working, or if a more difficult transit is occurring in tandem with the nodes, they can use the stick instead. This is when the universe beats you over the head and kicks you up the ass and basically says, oh yeah, you're cozy there in that South Node territory. Yeah, I can see what you've done with the place. It's nice, but it's a bit drab. It's a bit stagnant. There's nothing really going on there. Nothing has changed there for a while, has it? You know what? If you're so fucking cozy there and if you're not going to leave of your own accord, then guess I'll just have to burn the house down and then you'll have to go outside. Whatever you're holding on to in that area, it will either strip it away from you or show you its unpleasant, draconic visage, or ass, rather. It will show you the dragon's ass and how much fucking shit can come out of that gargantuan draconic ass. Those intestines are far more fertile than you would like to believe. It basically says, okay, you know, these things in the South Node may have worked for you before, they may have seemed like they were the answers to everything, and maybe at one point during the opposite end of the cycle, when the South Node was actually in the North Node and they were reversed when they were in the different signs, that may have once seemed an area where we had those eureka moments, where we had that euphoria, that revelation of learning and experiencing and digesting something new and feeling, yes, this is the vital element that's been missing that is going to make me more whole. But when we become too attached to that, and that's become a South Node experience, and we feel that it is just this this magical panacea that will sort out everything in our life, if we've held on to it that strongly to the point where we no longer feel the need to develop anything new, that is when we get that draconic ass shitting all over us saying, okay, it might have worked before, it might have worked 1,000 times, but for now, for some reason, not only is it just not working for you, your dependence on that way of approaching life is bringing you nothing but problems. Before it just seemed to fructify golden apples, and now those apples are full of poison and razor blades. Not only can you not stay here anymore because it's not comfortable, which is what you liked so much about it, you have to go. And if you're going to go anywhere, you might as well chase that north node over there, that thing you've been putting off, been procrastinating from, which you've been so afraid of, that dragon you haven't wanted to fight and which has been leering at you all this time. You've hidden here long enough, but now there is only one other way to go, and that is directly into the dragon's mouth. Anyway, now that I've spoken about dragon intestines long enough, which is the only reason I made this video, really, pretend to talk about astrology, really just talk about dragon shit. We can talk about the nodes and where they're actually transiting now, because they have shifted from being in Taurus and Scorpio to being with North Node in Aries and South Node in Libra. And the traditional interpretation of this would be that we need to personally develop more Aryan qualities with the North Node, or explore those avenues of life, and we need to relinquish our dependence on Libran areas of life or ways of approaching life. I think the reality is usually much more complex, and I would also say please pay attention to the houses that the nodes are transiting through in your natal charts, because I feel that will reveal much more than simply where they are in the signs. Your houses are the things that will ultimately give this transit its most personal flavour to you. However, for the sake of simplicity, I will still talk about what the basic gist of North Node in Aries and South Node in Libra is meant to mean. I would also like to clarify that not everyone will experience this nodal shift with the same level of friction and intensity, because it all depends on how it is influencing your personal natal chart. For instance, if Aries and those martial fiery forces are very strong within you, things that you feel comfortable living and expressing and embodying, then having the North Node transit Aries may feel like a wonderful, buoyant return to a part of yourself that perhaps you felt the need to diminish or neglect whilst other parts of your being were cultivated. And now it's like, yes, baby, I'm back on track, I can be me, I can do the things that I like, and for once, life is actually going to reward me with it. I think especially if the North Node is transiting an area of the chart where you have lots of planetary placements natally, then you will feel more encouraged in terms of developing those new fiery energies. However, if the South Node, conversely, is transiting an area of your natal chart where you feel very comfortable, where you identify strongly with, or where you have lots of natal planetary placements, inversely, it might feel like you have this big regressive pull pulling you back to these energies, offering you these strong temptations, and yet feeling that all of them are fated to disappoint you or fail or frustrate you in some way. So these challenges are always personal rather than global and universal. However, without further ado, and I do love my ado, I will talk about some of those universal global issues now. Now, North Node in Aries wants us to learn to live a life of radical authenticity, of honesty and truthfulness to ourselves in terms of how we live our life. It wants us to live a life that is by us and for us, that is in accordance with our own desires and the yearnings of our shining self. It does not want to live a life that has been subdued, safe, and compromised, but one that has been lived bravely, courageously, where we have taken hold of the reins of chance and made things happen as we wish to be. You have to remember that Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and in that sense it represents the first thrust of creation, of the world coming into being. But in order for the world to be created, there had to have been a creator who desired creation. And Aries represents that propulsive creative force that says, this must be, and I'm going to be the one to make it be. And anything that gets in my way, I will fight it, I will thwart it, and I will flick it aside like the obtrusive gnat that it is, and prove that my power, my willpower to create this thing and bring it into being is stronger than any opposition that comes against me. I will not let opposition wear me down. I will not let it defeat me. If anything, I will only allow it to compel me to develop a greater sense of strength and confidence in myself, of my refusal to be defeated. It will make me learn to develop an indomitable spirit that will not stop until it has achieved and realized whatever it has set its goal and vision upon. But how might this driving creative force be stymied? Well, I think it's easiest to look at this in the example of a relationship scenario, because the lunar nodes often express themselves most potently in the sphere of relationships. So we have to look at some of the regressive and propulsive pull of why the South Node in Libra might tempt us away from living a life of truthfulness and honesty to ourselves. Well, the South Node in Libra feels safest when it is in a relationship, where it is in an interdependent or codependent situation with someone else, where it is in a partnership in which it never does things entirely for itself, but will always take the feelings, the desires, and the wants of the other person or other people involved into account. It does not live by itself or for itself, but it lives for other people because it longs to experience harmony and peace and accord with those around it. It doesn't want disagreements and fights and flare-ups and blow-ups and fallings out. It wants everyone to get along peacefully, amicably, and diplomatically, and for everyone involved to feel like they've had their fair share, that they've had their fair say, that everyone has been included, that nothing has been left out, that those scales have been perfectly calibrated to maintain social order and civility. It is afraid of striking out and going out on its own and doing what it wants, because that could create disagreement. What if it wants to do something that won't be supported or encouraged or fostered by those around it? What if it wants something that is actually contrary to the desires of its partner or to the desires of the group or collective to which it belongs? To follow those desires could mean exile. It could mean the loss of a relationship. It could mean having to live a life of solitude in which your conviction and commitment to your own beliefs is stronger than your willingness to commit loyally and slavishly to other people. So whilst North Node in Aries trusts its impulses and desires as the shining beacon of its personal truth and mission in life above everything else, South Node in Libra can actually be terrified of its own feelings and desires, because desires are fiery, they're querulous, they're argumentative, they're disruptive, they're socially uncivilized and animalistic and bestial. If you want to get along with everyone, to be someone that most people like, one of the easiest things To achieve that is to subdue your desire nature as possible, because if you are just someone who is easily pleased or gives the appearance of being easily pleased and agreeable, and one of those types who are just happy to freely go along with what anyone else suggests, people go, oh, well, you know, they're an even-tempered person, they're not going to get upset if I suggest we do this or that thing, therefore they're pleasant, they're nice, they're easy to keep around. So, you know, for instance, South Node in Libra, if it was out with a group of friends and they were choosing a restaurant and they wanted to choose a restaurant that person didn't particularly like but everyone else wanted to go to, it wouldn't kick up a fuss. It would say, well, you know, there's probably not really going to be anything I eat there. The menu doesn't really cater to my dietary requirements, but you know, it's not important, you know, it's just a meal out. It's not a matter of big significance. I'm happy so long as everyone else is happy. And that's really the motto of South Node in Libra. So long as everyone else is happy, I can be happy too. But this can be taken with the South Node to such extremes that it actually becomes damaging and injurious to the self. It has subdued its idea of its own impulses and desires and wants and needs so strongly for the sake of keeping everyone else happy and harmonious that it doesn't even know really what they are anymore. And in many respects, it's also frightened to know. It thinks, you know, so long as other people are happy, I'm happy. So long as the desires and needs of other people are met, I'm also happy. So long as other people are pleased, I am pleased, because pleasuring other people is what gives me pleasure, and that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It is very true of people who are very Venusian or who have a strong 7th house or a strong moon or a Venus. But that desire never to kick up a fuss, never to create any disharmony, can end up meaning that South Node and Libra can get stuck in situations that are toxic, that are codependent, that are actually damaging to itself, but which it is afraid to remove itself from because it doesn't value itself enough to think, I am worth moving away from this situation. Rather than taking charge and fighting or making a stand for itself in a difficult situation, its natural response is to try and be diplomatic, to be reasonable, to be patient, to analyse the details, or maybe just to wait for things to change, because sure, things might be difficult in the moment, but you know, the moment tomorrow may change and change again, and the variables are always moving, and I'll keep moving along with the variables, and things may resolve themselves harmoniously without me having to take a stand. Or maybe someone who has a stronger willpower than myself will be the one to take a stand, so I won't have to make myself uncomfortable by putting myself out there. And yet that requires other people to be as sensitive and empathic and as finely socially attuned as South Node and Libra is. And very often, that is not the case of the people it surrounds itself with. So again, to give a relationship example, Libra and South Node might originally have been in a relationship that was mutual, that was equal, that did take its own wants and needs into account and managed to harmoniously balance those with the needs and desires of its partner and spouse. Everyone was happy, everyone checked in with one another, all difficulties were carefully and reasonably and nicely and neatly talked through. There was no rushing into any decisions, you know, everyone was taken into account. But gradually over time, that balance started to slip very much out of the favour of the Libra and South Node situation. More and more there were found reasons not to do the things that the Libra and South Node person wanted to do, and more reasons just to endlessly indulge the behaviours of the other person. And even though this continual self-denial and self-sacrifice to keep the other person happy, because if that other person wasn't kept happy, they would explode, they would create arguments, they would be difficult, they would create scenes, they would get upset. South Node and Libra thinks, well, I hate it when they behave like that. I hate it when they blow up. I hate it when they get upset. I hate it when they start throwing incriminations around or get violent or disagreeable or unreasonable. You know, I'll just be as passive as possible. I'll just let them get whatever they want, and that way life is more likely to be peaceful for me. But over time, that awareness of having had to give up everything just to keep that other person happy develops into this brooding resentment. They feel dependent on this other person. They can't stand the idea of them not being in their life, and yet their presence in their life is vampirizing them. It's sucking out all the life that they had. It is no longer feeding them. It is no longer nourishing them. It is actively wearing them down. And yet, because their sole comfort is being in a relationship, that their identity feels like it can only function in those situations, the idea of leaving it seems untenable, because again, they're still thinking about that other person. Well, you know, if I did leave that other person, or if I did stand up for myself and say something's got to change, well, what if they left me? Or what if I broke up with them and they were really upset and they hurt themselves, or they did something terrible, and then I would feel responsible. South Node in Libra has a tendency to not only take responsibility for its own self and its own feelings and its own emotions, but also feel responsible and accountable for the emotions and feelings of almost anyone it's connected with. And it can be so burdened and drowned down under those that any chance it has of actually expressing its squeaky little voice of its own needs just gets snowed under and disappears completely. But this is a state of affairs that North Node in Aries would never put up with, not for a million years. Just as South Node can be so overwhelmingly sensitively attuned to the need of others that its single solo voice is drowned out by its awareness of the collective orchestra blaring over it in raucous tones, the North Node in Aries is so strongly aware of its own desires and needs and its own special nature that it finds it quite easy to tune out other people's or to challenge them if it finds that they are not working in cahoots with one another. Whereas Libra and South Node might sit in a toxic, unhealthy, unpleasant situation and just hope that it will eventually resolve itself, North Node in Aries, as soon as it notices that something isn't going according to its own wants, will say, well, I'm not fucking putting up with this. I'm not sitting around for this. This isn't what I want. I know very clearly what I want. I feel the rage and the amplification and the joy and the life and vitality of that want flowing fierily through me every moment of the day. You know, fire is strong, fire blazes, fire shines, fire is certain of itself. It doesn't leave room for doubts like South Node in Libra does. And when it feels those fires blazing so strongly, anything that comes along and tries to subdue that fire or tame it or shut it away in a grate or make it dim, North Node in Aries feels immediately. It's an impulse. It doesn't have to think it through. It doesn't have to sit and rationalize it. It doesn't have to analyze it or draw up a pros and cons list that it can carry on, extrapolating more of for the next decade and a half. It says, no, I don't need my brain and intellectual analysis to figure out these things. I feel them. I know them now. I trust my intuition. I trust my impulses. Something is wrong. And if I can feel that something is wrong and it's not doing me any favors, the important person here, the person I actually have to fucking be 24/7, then something has to change. I have to take action immediately to make things better than what they currently are. And in this sense, Aries is very life-affirming. It believes that life should be joyful, it should be exciting, it should make you feel good about yourself, because that energy has an inherent self-belief in itself. It says, I obviously came into the world for a reason, to be a hero, to make a stand, to make my mark. And if I constantly go around being Mr. or Mrs. Nice Guy and just doing what everyone else wants, then where's my opportunity for heroism? I'm constantly quieting and tying up and chaining that hero. I'm not letting him do anything adventurous. I'm not letting him do anything bold. I'm not letting him do anything unique, because I'm afraid of how the collective will respond to that. And in a consequence, I do nothing. But Aries North Node says life is for the doing. And the doing should be now. It shouldn't be postponed to 10 years. It shouldn't be postponed to retirement. It shouldn't be postponed to when this or that person dies or leaves my life of their own accord or changes in a way that is more agreeable for me. It should be happening now. And I'm going to make it happen now. So as soon as Aries in North Node feels that light bulb moment in a relationship, it says, okay, this relationship is clearly toxic and unhealthy, and either it's going to say, I'm going to go, this isn't what I want, this isn't for me, fuck you, goodbye, or it's going to say, all right, I've been going too easy on you, there's been these problems, I've let them slide too longer, these things have to change. Okay, otherwise I'm gone. We can also look at how these two opposing nodes would go about the process of initiating a relationship to begin with North Node representing action and taking the initiative, and then South Node in Libra being about the principle of attraction, nuance, subtlety, refinement, and the giving of suggestive hints. So if South Node in Libra has made up its mind that it likes or loves someone and wants to be in a relationship with them, rather than coming out and categorically saying that, it's going to try and make itself appear as beautiful, attractive, pleasant, charming, beguiling and available and irresistible to that other person as much as possible, so that hopefully that other person will feel a strong desire and want aroused in them and take the decisive action that they refuse to take themselves. And rather than coming out and declaring what they want, they are going to be more focused on asking the other person what they want. And because they want the other person to want them, even if that other person reveals values or intentions or desires that are not at all in keeping with what their ideal relationship would be, because they want this person at all costs, they will accommodate that other person, they will work around them, they will say yes to things that if they were following their hearts they would be no to, because they're afraid if they said no to certain things or said, actually I don't agree with you here, actually I don't want those things, actually that's not what I want from a relationship, they would be losing that other person, they would be facing a life alone. And South Node in Libra would rather be in some kind of compromised relationship than being alone. Whereas for North Node in Aries, it would rather be alone than ever commit itself to any situation that forced it to be untruthful and inauthentic to who it feels itself to be. So North Node in Aries, on the other hand, if it decides it likes someone, it's going to make that very obvious. It's going to try and initiate something, it's going to declare its feelings and desires or express them in a totally clear and unambiguous way. But also in terms of, actually developing the relationship, it's going to be very clear about what it wants. It's going to say, this is what I want from a relationship, this isn't what I want from a relationship. And if the other person doesn't align with that, well, it'll say, well, okay, it's clearly not going to work. I will not waste time hanging around here. I will go find someone who is compatible with my wants, because I want a relationship that fulfills me, rather than being something that causes me to constantly sacrifice myself and therefore be less of myself. I recently read a wonderful novel by Vita Sackville-West called All Passion Spent, which is a wonderful expression of this nodal conflict. She is a woman who spent most of her life being the picture of the perfect woman, at least according to the standards of the times in the early 20th century when the novel was written. She was the wife of a prime minister, she had adoring, successful children, she lived, luxuriously and had lived a life of importance on the world stage. She had done all the things that were expected of her. She had been this perfect self-sacrificing wife who was willing to modify and rearrange and put aside all of her own personal desires to fulfill the wants and greater willpower of her husband, who she loved adoringly. And we meet this character in the novel just after this husband has died. And she now finds herself in the first position in her life since she was 18, where she is actually now in control of her life and can take the decision to do what she wants rather than simply being the plaything of other people's desires. But this happens rather late. This happens while she's in her 80s, when she has reached this point where all passion has been spent. And so she lives her final days alone, surrounded by eccentric, quaint companions who she rather enjoys, who are very different from the respectable, famous diplomats and politicians she spent most of her previous life with. And she dies in those quiet, humble circumstances, but with the happiness of knowing that that final year of her life was lived truly for herself and not just for everyone else. But if we learn the lesson of the nodes early, if we follow the impulses of that North Node, we don't have to wait until we're 80. We don't have to wait until all passion is spent. We can seize hold of what makes us passionate now and live for the now, which is what the Aries energy is all about. However, like I said, how you experience that energy personally will depend on the houses that it is transiting through in your birth chart. For instance, someone who has North Node transiting through the first house might experience the complete opposite of this, that they have to move away from the comfort of being independent, in charge and in control all the time, of being the leader, and gradually relinquish their energies and put their drive into being in relationships, being in partnerships, being in compromised, equal, harmonious situations, learning to be more diplomatic and accommodating to others and finding empowerment through that. Someone with North Node transiting through their third house might have to learn to speak up for themselves more, to take the initiative in communication, to learn to think for themselves instead of relying totally on the received wisdom of the collective, of their teachers, of religions or moral institutions that give those great thou shalt. Again, someone in the 12th house might have a very different experience where instead of taking control, they have to learn the power and bravery of being in situations where they have to surrender control completely or totally sacrifice their willpower to serve other people, and also to have the bravery to explore the hidden psychoanalytical depths of themselves. So, like I said, this is not a universal experience. It's going to depend how it works out in your personal chart. Whereas someone who has these nodes moving with the North Node in the first house and the South Node in the 7th, it's going to be experienced more like what I've described here. So again, please look in your own charts. If you don't know where it is transiting, you can talk to me. We can have a whole lengthy conversation about it if you like. Anyway, I could go on about this indefinitely. I've given you examples in relationships, but the pull of those nodes, of the drive to be independent rather than dependent, to take control, that rather than always being taken control of by others, to live for yourself rather than always for other people, that can play out in any sphere of your life, and your natal chart will reveal most likely the spheres that will be highlighted. But I'm going to finish that video there. Please like, share and subscribe. Please comment about your own experiences of this nodal shift, or tell me about the experience of the placement of your nodes in your own charts. I always love listening to you and hearing from you about your experiences. That's how I learn and grow and develop as an astrologer. And until then, enjoy the game of snakes and ladders.